Is The Devil's Rejects an example of disgusting masterclass filmmaking, or an offensive attempt at dancing around the horrible atrocities that occur in the real world? It seems it's still clear The Devil's Rejects stands as the perfect Rob Zombie film, totally living up to its name, and it's no surprise it's the work of Rob Zombie. It seems well documented that Rob Zombie isn't particularly loved in the horror genre, perhaps thanks to the die-hard Halloween fans, but evidently more so, I feel like those who like his films really like his films, and the same can be told for the opposite side. Rejects is said to be inspired by films such as The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Badlands, and an apparent inspiration of the Manson family, with some quotes loosely based from Charles Manson himself.
I want lightning to come down and crash upon my fucking head.
I believe highly in a director having a style that they are unwilling to change, and I've always thought that's what made directors like Rob Zombie so reliable. As a horror fan, I've seen the consensus range between sick, over-the-top bad acts of horror to perfect layers of sadistic character expositions. Sid Haig forefronting exactly the range he possessed with the roles he played. Now we look back on a memorial of a great talent with a fierce catalogue of stories that were blessed because of him. Much to the similarity of what made Damien Leone grim in Terror, Rob Zombie always posed a sinister story that makes audiences feel either true dread or a shallow sense of what is too much for a horror film. The line between a horror film or an adventure of the most disturbing ideas of how to elevate the true simple acts that modern flicks won't daringly travel to. The Devil's Rejects, while funded as a sequel to House of 1000 Corpses, plays more like a solo road trip horror. I view it in the same way I view some of the works of Eli Roth, with Rob Zombie dialogue uncomfortable, boundaries certainly being pushed, fantastic performances from Sid Haig, Ken Foree, Matthew McGregory, and Michael Berryman. See, I don't hold much time for the argument of this director not being a horror director, as the work would clearly stand for itself, with The Devil's Rejects being solely the idea it was always supposed to be, which was just disturbing. I have always found this family of morbid creatures of the sick and wholly depraved to be a lot in line with the backward hillbillies of the Wrong Turn franchise, with the obvious inspiration of the cultist group of the Manson murders in Los Angeles. So if you pull back on the curse words or the lack of viewing another human as equal, there are still elements of why this story feels like a really fresh conception, even given its time already as long as it's been in the genre. One of the common downfalls of a film this sick is when it's purely made to be shocking through the character dialogue or the character values or in the way it removes a possible success of a hero. It's that the characters sometimes aren't well written, but more so rely on the value of being shocked or the absurdness in the acts of the plot. The Devil's Rejects doesn't rely on this because the characters are evidently as evil as the lines of dialogue try and say they are. I am the devil and I'm here to do the devil's work. It's a promise that as wrong as any act can be, it will, even as unforgiving as it could possibly be. Rob Zombie has 7 films, with 3 of them being in the world of the Firefly family, and it's clear that Rob Zombie's true creative example of his style is The Devil's Rejects.
Wow, a guy whose last name is Zombie. He must be super cool. Or not.
Outside of the success of Halloween, this is a story wholly his from inception to where it meets its end in Tree from Hell.
One bullet! For every second you make me wait.
This movie holds a certain golden grain found footage on a dusty town far from help or salvation, and I think one of its biggest strengths is that it's so unforgiving. From the start all the way until the end, even as a fan of all these films, I'm not overly familiar with the term grindhouse horror, which The Devil's Rejects would certainly categorically be part of. It's expletive, it's bizarre, it's absolutely violent. Although it's not the lowest of budgets, it feels like a 70s B film, much like the original Chainsaw films it felt like.
Oh, George, he was a good man. Very trusting. I'm sure that's what got him killed.
Nudity is something horror films have never sneered their noses to, but in the way Rob Zombie explores it, it's significantly less decadent, on the verge of being just gross.
Well, what are you?
I mean, you got this hot piece of ass shaking her shit right in front of you and you're not getting any ideas? What do you call that?
I'm a married man.
A married fucking man.
In the age we live in now, it's a fact that horrific tales of violence are under incredible scrutiny, but has The Devil's Rejects managed to slip past that because it is a torture show? Look, I have rules of what's too far in horror films, and I won't lie in saying that this film doesn't tread dangerously close. I don't like assault that's more than murder, I don't like children dying, there are rules, and I don't think this movie crosses it, but I will admit that it wasn't very far from it. From its beginning, it starts off very strong with a shootout between the deranged Firefly family and the sheriffs and deputies. Whether it's the grain emphasizing the period it came from, or it's the characters being as filthy as the conditions they create through murder, I find it a horror film that succeeds in navigating most dire stories without taking it to where I do feel disgust. And don't get me wrong, like some of the scenes, I do have a solid face of disgust, like my face is made of cement. You would really question the evil perversion in parts of the film, but then you're reminded the movie is literally called The Devil's Rejects. There are many films that I won't watch, and this isn't one of them, and it may be my favor of Rob Zombie that's playing a part, but I do understand that if you aren't a fan of the cast in this film, it won't matter whether the story is the story, because when you see the same people being brought back time after time, it's understandable you're not going to like it. But Rob Zombie isn't the only person in horror film history or in film history at all to do this with their films. Lots of directors come back to actors they've worked with before. I am almost always impressed with the way Rob Zombie sets up scenes that are almost like the music video territory with the rock influence, but in film form. I find it beautiful. It's like a beautiful understanding of art to eye and ear. Much like its brothers and sisters, The Devil's Rejects is once again a slam shot of the gruesome and violent work of the director Rob Zombie. I always thought Rob Zombie had that trashy, bullied kid, redneck family vibe. God knows why, but the teams are the teams. Even from his days of fronting the band White Zombie, he always incorporated this similar horror imagery, also directing his own music videos, which I think deserves a lot of props, well deservingly. It's always had a cult following for Rob Zombie, and he always had that unforgivable F you while he did it vibe as well. I wouldn't watch this film with my mother, and you shouldn't either. How would you explain to her that it's just Rob Zombie style, because she won't care? The Devil's Rejects is one of the more unforgivingly cruel films to be released in the early 2000s. But it does so without turning into a full frontal gore fest. And I'm not saying that cutting off the face of some lady's husband and waving it in front of her and trying to put it on her face like some sort of mask you bought for Halloween isn't gore fest territory. But this film does push the lines with some scenes feeling overdrawn, but it also just creates this unsettling feeling that they don't want to cut away from too soon, because it really makes you want to stop watching. And to answer the question, The Devil's Rejects is the Rob Zombie film, because it's the most like the underlying theme every one of his films is seeming to work off of. It's horrible, but not in the way that I find it to be a bad movie, but more so in the way that it's a bad movie. Rest in peace to Captain Spaulding. Sid Haig, you are very much missed.
50 years in film as we speak. Yep, this is my 50th year, and I'm still going strong, and I don't plan to stop. July 14th this year, I'll be 72 years old, and I feel like I'm 25.